Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And today was a Q&A, so I do have 30 minutes of informative content up. And you know what? Today I'm going to make this video informative too. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Alright, I'm going to talk a little bit about Brandon Carter. And not someone I've known a whole lot about. Started kind of looking into what's going on because people said, hey, look at this fight between him and Kenobi. And I've noticed it was over ketogenic diet. So I went and took a closer look at some of Brandon's material on the ketogenic diet. And the reality of it is, this is someone who actually, yeah, he probably has done a lot of reading. He clearly has. However, he's new to the ketogenic diet. I've someone who's used them in the past. I've messed with them off and on throughout my life for well over a decade. I'm also familiar with all the scientific literature on it from both directions. That's the thing that he's not seeming to address. He's one of these guys who's new to it, said I started doing it a few months ago, saw great results. So he delved into everything written by pro-ketogenic authors. Okay, that seems to be what he's done. And he actually hasn't looked at the clinicians, registered dietitians, sports dietitians, medical doctors, cardiologists, endocrinologists, all of these people who think it's either not that great of an idea or who don't advise it at all for 99% of the population. He hasn't looked into what they're saying, and that's what people need to grasp. There are two sides to this story. Two sides to the story. A few things that he kind of gets wrong is he keeps focusing on insulin. The guy is saying, you know, ketogenic diets are different from low-carb diets like Atkins. Actually, Atkins is more or less a ketogenic diet. And the Atkins diet is usually more than 50% fat. If you eat the foods Dr. Atkins tells you to do, and we've all read Dr. Atkins' book, haven't we all? Everyone who works out has read Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution. I don't think anyone who trains or watches YouTube Fitness hasn't read that book at some point in their life. It's over 50% fat. It's higher fat than protein. In some cases, it would actually be a true ketogenic diet depending upon your food selection, but if you roughly follow his food choices, you're probably going to be on a ketogenic diet. So I'm not sure where he got this idea that it wasn't, but he's saying, you know, it's different from low carb and that you're replacing food with fat. And he's pointing out that, you know, yeah, it's generally going to be a higher calorie diet than most low carb diets, because low carbs generally you're replacing the carbs with protein, and that's going to end up putting you in a caloric deficit by default. But isn't that kind of the point? The whole point of any of these diets is to create a caloric deficit. That's the point of the ketogenic diet. And he doesn't flat come out and say, hey, you know, the ketogenic diet lets you eat more calories, build more muscle, and lose fat even if you overeat. He doesn't flat say that, but he sort of implies it. And that's the problem. He's saying, you know, the hormones matter. When insulin's low, you cannot really gain body. And that's not true. There's no evidence anywhere in the world to suggest that low insulin levels makes it harder to gain body fat. That's not documented anywhere in the scientific literature. We know that elevated insulin levels are the pathway by which carbohydrates, and in some cases protein, prevent fat burning. But it's because of their calories. It's because of their calories, because that's the way it's derived. When those things are high, when circulating glucose is high, insulin goes up to respond to shuttle it into muscle tissue and organs and everything as a fuel source. All right, it blunts fat burning, but it's not the same thing as blunting fat loss in your body. Because when you have glucose available, your body doesn't burn as much fat for fuel. Whereas if you were to consume a huge amount of fat and you don't have much circulating insulin, your body doesn't need to blunt fat burning. It's got all the fat in the world that it needs to burn from your diet. And that's what he's not grasping, and that's what every expert in the world who looks at the data and says people are misunderstanding that the low insulin levels and high fat in their diet means that they're burning more body fat. They're confusing burning fat or ketones for fuel with losing fat on your body. No, you've given your body an alternative fuel source. That's the difference. Your body stops burning fat when it has large amounts of carbohydrates as an option to burn. Okay? When an insulin goes up to help store it and shuttle it into tissue. But if you have a lot of fat in your diet, your body still doesn't burn body fat. It's like, well, you're burning more fat because you're eating more fat. Yeah, because that's what you're giving your body for fuel. Your body will also burn more alcohol if you drink a bunch of vodka. because that's what you're feeding it. In other words, the body burns what you give it as a fuel source. Humans have an amazing metabolism. We burn what we eat. But when you eat more fat, yeah, you're burning more fat because that's the fuel you just gave it. It still doesn't tap into your body fat stores, so you're in a caloric deficit. And here's the thing, he kept going on and on. He seems to go and be obsessed with the insulin thing, as if insulin is the real problem here. And here's the thing. He keeps talking about, well, you don't want to do too much of this because it'll spike your insulin. Insulin levels don't spike. Insulin levels don't spike in healthy people. They elevate, but they don't spike. And here's the thing. This is what's been noted by experts over the years. People who are very physically active, who eat high carbohydrate diets, have just as low of circulating insulin levels as people on ketogenic diets. What? I'm going to repeat that. This has been noted by researchers and experts over the years. Healthy, athletic people, people who lift weights, do cardio, do conditioning work, who eat high carbohydrate diets, have insulin levels just as low as people on ketogenic diets. Now, people will say, how is that possible? That doesn't make sense. You have to have insulin to transport all of these things. That's right. But on a ketogenic diet, you're probably eating 20 to 25% protein. People on ketogenic diets lose insulin sensitivity. They lose insulin sensitivity. Ketogenic diets do not improve insulin sensitivity. They reduce it. But because you're consuming less foods that need insulin, less of it circulating. But your insulin sensitivity isn't particularly great when you're on it. All right? So it requires more insulin to shuttle some of that protein around than that you might normally need in a normal environment. People who are extremely physically active, who burn through massive amounts of calories, have dramatically higher insulin sensitivities. Therefore, they can be eating sometimes thousands of calories of carbohydrates and their insulin levels never get that high because their muscle tissue has such a high insulin sensitivity that very small amounts of insulin shuttle all the carbs and stuff they eat into their muscle tissue. And as far as it being magical for health, it's not. There aren't legitimate health benefits. What's been noted by some proponents of the ketogenic diet in the medical field is that it might be as healthy and no more risk than other types of various diets. Or it might actually be slightly healthier than the typical American diet. But when you compare it to more traditional whole food diets, people's blood work oftentimes don't look as good on it. They're not as healthy. As a matter of fact, if you start looking at people who recommend these diets clinically, like registered dietitians, medical doctors who work at epilepsy, almost all of them say this sort of diet, they don't think it should be done outside of medical supervision. In other words, they don't believe, and this is tons of registered dietitians, even people who prescribe these diets. People who prescribe these diets for cancer treatment, people who prescribe these diets for childhood epilepsy, generally believe, due to certain risk involved in this sort of diet, that they don't think people should undertake a diet this extreme outside of the care of a medical doctor and under prescription, who's getting blood work done once a week, who's having their vital signs monitored. In other words, they don't believe it's something you should do on your own. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that when most medical practitioners say you shouldn't do something outside of a prescription or on your own, fitness professionals should probably be leery of recommending that people do that on their own. Okay? They should probably be leery of doing that. That would be like me saying, anabolics are great, anabolic steroids are great. You people should all go take them outside of the care of a medical doctor. Is that any different of advice? Most medical doctors will tell you steroids should only be used under the prescription of a doctor. There are plenty of doctors who will prescribe them for you. They'll monitor you. There's tons of doctors who will. Absolutely, even for guys who just want to build muscle. But ketogenic diets are seen by professionals who utilize them medically in the same manner. They don't think people should do them outside of the care of a medical doctor. We as gurus or people giving fitness advice in the fitness field should probably be careful about recommending people do things that all the medical professionals say should only be done under the care of a medical doctor. Just throwing that out there. There can be complications with these diets. They can be complications, and they do happen. there are problems. People do have electrolyte imbalances. They do have massive water loss problems from ketogenic diets. They can get dehydrated. People can see actually massive shifts the other direction in their cholesterol. All right, not everyone's blood work improves on these sort of diets. Not everyone's blood pressure improves on these sort of diets. Some people have major medical problems as a response to it. Some people don't adapt well to ketosis, even the high fat. They end up having fainting spells, brain fog, difficulty operating machinery, driving a car. All right, it doesn't give you mental clarity. And anyone says, well, I get mental clarity. Oh, no, you don't. That's never been noted in any scientific literature. Now, as far as people saying other health benefits, show me a culture that's a long-lived culture on Earth that's followed an ultra-high-fat diet. Because all the longest-lived cultures on the face of the Earth that follow a diet that we can actually see a pattern in, almost all of them eat at least 70% of their calories from carbohydrates. Every single culture on Earth with an extremely long lifespan, a longer than average lifespan, they all eat ultra-high carb, starch-based diets. Almost everyone, all of them do actually. What is it? The one that people look at as the example, the Inuits? Well, the Inuits followed a ketogenic. No, they didn't. They followed, a high-fat diet. It wasn't purely ketogenic. Bit much to get into, but consuming raw meat is not ketogenic. Think about that for a moment. What changes in meat when you cook it? All that glucose, glycogen. Glycogen is carbs. What do you think's in blood? What do you think's in all the meat before you cook it? When you cook it, it cooks it all out. Breaks it down. Raw meat is loaded full of glycogen. And they're eating it fresh and immediately. So it's been estimated their diet was as high as 20 to 25% carbs due to all the glycogen in the meat. But that being said, the highest fat diet we know is the Inuits. They had a very short lifespan. They were overweight. The Inuits were actually rotund people on their traditional diet with relatively short lifespans. Their average lifespan was only about 60 years. So are we really going to talk about this as a health benefit? Same thing. People talk about, well, he's getting really lean on it. Are we just going to take anecdote, or are we going to look at the number of athletes who are really, really lean who follow ultra high carb diets? They outnumber the low carb guys 20 to 1. 20 to 1. People say, well, what do you mean? All right, let's just take YouTubers. Okay, so Brandon Carter and what's his name? Whitlock. Jason Whitlock. They're using it. They get lean. All right, other extreme. Take someone like Alberto Nunez. The guy gets leaner than they do. What's his diet look like? His cutting diet, he eats 700 grams of carbs a day, including junk food and Pop-Tarts and ice cream. He eats 700 grams of carbs a day when cutting, and he gets leaner than these guys do in the ketogenic diets. So if we're just going to use the anecdote, see the problem there with taking these exceptions to the rule? Because most people aren't going to get shredded on 700 grams of carbs and eating Pop-Tarts and ice cream every day, but he does. So these guys don't even get as lean as he does. If we're just going to single cherry pick examples, well, there you go. See the problem with that? Then you take the same thing. All the experts, and you say, well, you're only talking about athletes. Athletes need lots of carbs, but bodybuilders don't. You guys are right. Bodybuilders aren't athletes. So what about the bodybuilding experts? How many prep coaches do you guys know of who have a graduate degree of some type of nutrition, who prep people for bodybuilding shows, who get them shredded, who recommend ketogenic diets? I can't think of one. Almost every one of them recommend high carb diets. Think through the different people you guys know who have a master's or a PhD in nutrition who prep bodybuilders. Almost every one of them say the same thing. Keep your carbs as high as you can get away with. All of them do that. Think that's a coincidence? Same thing. What else has he got going on? He's like, well, I'm going to bring out these new books. I'm kind of like on a keto hacks. Well, that's okay. You know what? You can't patent a diet idea. You're allowed to take other people's stuff. But all the keto hacks for people who want to follow ketogenic diets and learn all the metabolic trickery and tricks to doing it, there's already successful books written on this. They don't need new books on it. Now, he's free to do it because you can't patent diets and you can't patent exercise prescriptions. So you're free to steal anyone's workout and anyone's diet and sell it. There's no U.S. laws preventing that. You can't patent those things. You can't trademark them. You trademark names. But Lyle McDonald and Dr. Mario Di Pasquale have already written all the definitive guides for this. They've been out for years. They've been out for decades, actually. Pretty well covered already. People don't need more new books on it. He's free to sell them, but it's not anything new. And I promise you, his books aren't going to be as good as these guys. He's not as intelligent or as educated as they are in the field. But again, that's for getting ripped. Ketogenic diets are not ideal health diets. They work through appetite suppression. That's it. People lose more muscle on them. In most of the studies that are done, they lose more muscle than higher carb diets. They're much harder to gain muscle on. They're not necessarily ideal for a lot of people, but the fact of the matter is they suppress appetite in a lot of people who use them, so they eat less calories. You eat less calories, you lose more fat. It has nothing to do with the insulin. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.